A bold cyber breach has jolted Iran amid intensifying nationwide unrest. Tehran's television was hacked, breaching a near-total internet blackout. With protests entering the 23rd day, the conflict now has surged onto the digital battlefield.
It seems from all reports that we're getting, and we are very, very limited in what we can say true, but it seems from the latest reports that the protests that have been sweeping through the entire country have been quelled for now.
And lasting peace. Along with President Macron and President Zelensky, we agreed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces in the event of a peace deal.
Tehran is burning, but the fire you see on the news is merely a distraction from the real catastrophe unfolding in the shadows. While the world watches the smoke rising from government buildings and security vehicles in the streets, a far more sinister operation is taking place behind the closed doors of the regime's most secure palaces. The cities are falling one by one, and security forces are beginning to switch sides. Yet the collapse of this regime is not being measured by the number of protesters in the squares, but by the weight of the gold bars currently being loaded onto unmarked cargo planes. What is happening in Iran right now is not simply a moment of social unrest or a crisis triggered by external sanctions. It is the largest, most organized, and most ruthless state asset transfer operation in modern history. The oligarchs and mullahs who have ruled with an iron fist for decades are no longer trying to save their government. They are trying to save their personal fortunes. Families are queuing for visas in the capitals of the very nations they spent 40 years calling the Great Satan, while heavy transport aircraft are establishing an air bridge to move tons of physical assets to Moscow. Digital billions are flowing silently into encrypted accounts in Dubai and Istanbul. This is the definitive proof that the theocratic structure in Tehran is effectively bankrupt, not just financially, but morally and existentially. While more than 20,000 people demanding their basic freedoms have lost their lives on the asphalt of Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan, a $200 billion heist is being executed with military precision behind the scenes. This confirms one terrifying reality. Supreme Leader Khamenei and the oligarchy surrounding him have completely lost faith in their own future. History is repeating itself with a cruel irony. Just as the Shah fled in 1979 on a plane filled with gold, the current rulers are preparing for an exit that dwarfs that historical escape, with flight paths now charted toward Moscow and Paris, leaving a nation of 80 million people to struggle amidst ruins, hunger, and bullets. To understand the anatomy of this massive heist, we must look past the chaos on the streets and focus on the cold, hard data emerging from the financial sector. The first crack in the dam appeared with a single massive transaction that intelligence agencies flagged immediately. Reports indicate that Mojtaba Khamenei, the Supreme Leader's son and the regime's shadow operator, transferred $1.5 billion in a single move to secure accounts in Dubai. But make no mistake, this $1.5 billion is merely pocket change, a rounding error in the true scale of the Khamenei financial empire. When we combine current financial intelligence reports with historical data, a gargantuan economic structure emerges, known as Setad, or the headquarters for executing the order of the Imam. This is a business juggernaut directly controlled by Khamenei, built entirely on the systematic seizure of property from ordinary Iranians. A comprehensive investigation by Reuters more than a decade ago estimated its value at $95 billion. But that was a lifetime ago in economic terms. Today, through aggressive seizures, non-transparent government tenders, and stock market manipulation, conservative estimates place Setad's wealth between $150 billion and $170 billion. When you add the sprawling smuggling networks controlled by Revolutionary Guard generals, the opaque religious foundations, and the unregistered billions generated by the petrochemical industry, the total wealth currently being siphoned out of Iran is estimated to be around $250 billion. This is not just corruption, it is the liquidation of a nation. United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been explicit about this phenomenon.
Our Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran,
describing it as rats fleeing a sinking ship. We are witnessing tens of millions of dollars being wired out of the country every single week, leaving behind an economic shell that is rapidly collapsing in on itself. The intelligence picture becomes even darker when we listen to the voices from within the Iranian opposition who maintain deep contacts inside the regime's security apparatus. Reza Pahlavi has stated openly that intelligence gathered from secret meetings within Khamenei's inner circle confirms that the top echelons of leadership are in the final stages of their evacuation protocols. They are not planning a counteroffensive, they are planning an exit strategy. Pahlavi emphasizes that his network has intercepted communications indicating that families are packing bags and private jets are being fueled for departure to exile destinations. This is a complete disaster scenario for Khamenei because it signals that the rot has reached the very core of his power structure. When the people you trust most are secretly moving their assets abroad, the game is effectively over. Pahlavi's repeated assertions that the regime's collapse is inevitable are not just political rhetoric, they are based on the forensic accounting of theft. He argues that these billions, stolen over decades, will eventually be returned to the people of a free Iran to reconstruct the shattered economy. But right now, the focus is on the crime in progress. The sheer volume of wealth being extracted suggests that the mullahs plan to leave nothing behind but scorched earth. They are effectively strip mining the country before they abandon it. This reality transforms the conflict from a political struggle into a crime scene investigation of epic proportions. The promise that corrupt officials and human rights violators will face justice is a powerful motivator for the streets, but the immediate reality is a race against time to stop the hemorrhaging of national wealth before it disappears into the global shadow banking system. This evacuation is not limited to wire transfers and digital ledgers. It has a heavy physical component that is currently visible on radar screens across the region. A physical evacuation operation is being carried out simultaneously with the financial one, utilizing an unusual air bridge that has been established between Tehran and Moscow. According to information presented in the British Parliament and corroborated by open-source air traffic data, heavy cargo planes originating from Russia and Belarus are flying into Iranian airspace with suspicious frequency. There is strong intelligence indicating that these flights, operated by Ilyushin 76TD military transport aircraft, often flying under civilian codes, are transporting physical gold reserves directly from the vaults of the Central Bank of Iran and the private stockpiles of the regime's elite. This is not commercial trade. The flight patterns and the urgency of the turnaround times bear all the hallmarks of a military logistics operation designed for asset rescue. Just as Bashar al-Assad moved a significant portion of his fortune to Moscow before the situation in Damascus became critical, the Khamenei regime is entrusting its survival fund to Vladimir Putin's Russia. They view Moscow as the only port in a storm that will refuse to extradite them or freeze their assets. This creates a terrifying geopolitical symmetry. The very gold that was stolen from the Iranian people is being flown to Russia, likely to finance a life of luxury for the mullahs while simultaneously paying for the Russian protection that keeps their escape routes open. It is a transaction of survival between two pariah states, executed in the dark of night, while the citizens of Tehran wake up to hyperinflation and empty bank vaults. However, the most striking aspect of this panic, and the one that exposes the regime's ideological bankruptcy most clearly, is the sudden love affair the elites have developed with the West. The very same regime figures who have spent years burning Western flags in the streets and chanting death to America and Europe are now frantically conducting secret diplomatic traffic to seek refuge in the capitals of the so-called Rotten West. Intelligence reports leaked to the French press reveal a stunning hypocrisy. Family members of high-ranking officials, including those close to the parliament speaker and former presidents, are attempting to obtain French visas through high-priced Parisian lawyers. Khamenei's inner circle and the leading figures of the reformist wing are preparing the legal groundwork for a luxurious life in exile in Paris, London, or Toronto, while the Revolutionary Guards are shooting teenagers in the streets of Tehran. This is the ultimate betrayal. It proves that the regime has collapsed not just financially, but ideologically. The narrative of martyrdom is for the poor. The visas to the Champs-Élysées are for the rich. This situation documents beyond any doubt that the ruling class is the first group to abandon the ship of the Islamic Revolution. The United States Treasury is closely monitoring this hypocrisy, tracking the tens of millions of dollars in unexplained outflows that are being laundered through shadow banking networks. These funds are moving through a complex triangle of Dubai, Istanbul, and Moscow, utilizing crypto assets and shell companies to evade sanctions. On one hand, the regime cuts off the internet to hide its atrocities from the world. On the other, it utilizes high-speed international banking networks to secure its retirement funds. This is not just an escape plan for a few individuals. It is the systematic emptying of the state's coffers to finance life after the inevitable collapse. The void created by this massive capital flight has created an irreparable black hole in the center of the Iranian economy, and the consequences are being felt most acutely by the ordinary citizens fighting for survival. This scenario, which the United States Treasury Department describes as a complete financial collapse, has resulted in a domestic banking crisis where local branches are unable to provide even basic cash withdrawals. Inflation has skyrocketed to hyperinflation levels, rendering the rial less valuable than the paper it is printed on. The economic devastation has pushed the working class into the streets, joining the political protesters. Oil workers, railway employees, and teachers who have not been paid for months are striking, driven now by hunger and the raw instinct for survival rather than just political ideology. The emptying of the regime's coffers has begun to test the loyalty of the repressive apparatus itself, causing disruptions in the salary payments of the security forces. This is the regime's nightmare scenario, when the soldier on the street realizes his paycheck is worthless because his commander has stolen the reserves. His gun may soon turn in the other direction. People on the streets are now demanding not only freedom, but the return of their stolen bread and their stolen future. This shift transforms the character of the protests from a civil rights movement into an all-out existential war for resources. The public is fully aware that their poverty is directly linked to the planes taking off for Moscow. They know, that every dollar that leaves the country is a dollar that could have put food on their table or medicine in their hospitals. This awareness of theft is clearly visible in the specific targets the protesters are choosing to attack. It is no coincidence that bank branches, tax offices, and state-owned financial institutions are being set on fire in cities like Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. The burning of the Ayande Bank headquarters, or the black smoke rising from the Tehran Tax Administration building, proves that the people's anger is laser-focused on the centers of the looting. The public no longer views these institutions as service points for the community. They see them as the operational nodes of the theft, the very places where the regime processes the money it is stealing. Burning security vehicles in squares and besieging government buildings demonstrates that the wall of fear has been totally breached. The public has accepted the reality that they have absolutely nothing left to lose. The regime's tired rhetoric about foreign agents or external provocateurs falls on deaf ears when faced with empty refrigerators and the undeniable reality of stolen billions. Khamenei's recent statements claiming to have broken the backs of the rebels while ignoring the thousands killed only highlight the delusional gap between the palace and the street. He frames the massacre of his own people as a victory, unaware that his victory speech is being drowned out by the sound of his own cronies packing their suitcases. The death toll exceeding 20,000 and the imprisonment of tens of thousands more is a tragedy, but it is also a sign of the regime's panic. The Prosecutor General's threat to continue executions rapidly and decisively is the lash of a dying beast. They are using terror because it is the only card they have left, but contrary to their calculations, this brutality is not dampening the protests. It is radicalizing the resistance. Amidst this chaos, the regime's most loyal supporters are showing fractured lines of allegiance. As news spreads through the barracks that the leaders are chasing Paris visas and wiring money to Dubai, a deep and bitter sense of betrayal is spreading among the besieged militias and the lower-ranking Revolutionary Guard personnel. These are the men tasked with holding the line, yet they are realizing they are merely cannon fodder for an elite that is already checked out. The idea that we are dying here for them while they are fleeing with the cash has become the single biggest breach in the regime's defense line. Defections are becoming a daily occurrence, even at the higher levels of power. This psychological breakdown is the greatest threat to the regime because it has the potential to paralyze the chain of command entirely. It is impossible to predict who an armed force that is unpaid and demoralized will turn its weapons on next. This internal collapse is compounded by a massive circle of external military and diplomatic pressure that has placed the regime in a strategic checkmate. The deployment of the USS George Washington aircraft carrier, one of the most powerful assets in the United States Navy to the region, is a clear signal that time is running out. The Pentagon moving to full readiness status, combined with statements from American leadership supporting potential decisive actions, has heightened the panic in Tehran. The delay in any external attack is not a sign of weakness. It is a calculation to allow the internal rot to do its work, synchronizing external pressure with the domestic uprising to ensure a total collapse rather than a partial one. In this predicament, Khamenei's escape strategy, now dubbed Plan B, has evolved from a rumor into a documented reality in intelligence circles. Assessments indicate that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has prepared an emergency extraction plan to leave Tehran with his 20 closest associates and family members the moment security forces lose control of the capital. At the heart of this plan is the flight to Moscow, mirroring the path of his ally Assad, but on a grander scale. Russia, where Khamenei has invested political capital for years, moved his gold, and established strategic partnerships, remains the only bunker in the world likely to open its doors to him. This scenario confirms that Iran's claim to independent sovereignty has actually devolved into a vassal relationship dependent on Russian protection. From a historical perspective, the parallels between Iran in 2026 and Iran in 1979 are frighteningly clear. On January 16, 1979, when Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi boarded a plane with his chests of treasure and left the country, he left behind an angry populace and a collapsed system. Today, the mullahs, who seized power by accusing the Shah of theft and servitude to foreigners, are playing the leading role in the exact same script. The revolution that devoured its children is now spewing out its founders. The Shah's departure marked the end of an era, and this escape plan prepared by Khamenei and his elite marks the closing credits of the Islamic Republic.